Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about bioremediation and biorecovery, and specifically the underpinning mechanisms behind bioremediation and biorecovery. So let's get started. So we talked in the previous video over cell walls and biosorption, I'll link it up here if you want to check it out, about microbial surface reactivity. And this video about bioremediation and recovery relates to that video in that the fundamental mechanisms behind biosorption are what allow us to do something called bioremediation. So what is bioremediation in the first place? Well, we release metal pollutants and contaminants into the environment, and one way to remove these contaminants is by employing the metal binding properties of microbial biomass. These are some of the properties that we talked about in that previous video and we'll talk more about here today. But what do I mean by biomass exactly? Well, it turns out that both living and dead microorganisms can efficiently bind metals, and there are several different ways in which microbes can bind these metals. These different ways or mechanisms are sometimes called slightly different names, but in general, the four main categories of ways that microbes bind metals include biosorption, bioaccumulation, biotransformation, and biomineralization. In the case of biotransformation, we talked more about the ways that microbes biotransform metals and just other chemicals in general in the metabolic diversity and redox videos, and we'll also talk more about biotransformation as well as biomineralization in the upcoming biomineralization videos. There are going to be a few or several biomineralization videos because as I'm making this, I'm also working on those videos as well and the PowerPoints for those, and there's just a lot to talk about, but it's really cool and interesting what biology can do to mineralize, well, minerals, and we'll talk about that in those videos as well as more about biotransformation. But in this video, we're going to be talking more about biosorption and bioaccumulation. First, we'll talk about biosorption. Biosorption is the passive adsorption of metals onto microbial surfaces. What does this mean? Well, adsorption rather than absorption is the absorption of metals onto microbial surfaces rather than into microbes themselves, whereas absorption with a B is absorption into, and that applies to absorption or adsorption of anything. It's not just with microbes. So in the case of biosorption, we're talking about the passive adsorption of metals onto microbial surfaces. And the pros of using this type of method, this biosorption method for bioremediation, include that it is inexpensive, the biomass can be easily regenerated, it is non-hazardous waste, and you can choose the selectivity of your bacteria or microbes that you're utilizing for specific metals. By this, I mean that there are different bacteria that we know bind with specific metals, and you can choose which one you want to bind your certain contaminant that you know is in that area that you want to remediate or remove. And after using biomass for biosorption or remediation, the metal-laden biosorbent that you use can be dealt with by incineration. So you can incinerate the biomass and then dispose of the ash at landfills, or you can reuse it. Like we talked about in the previous slide, you can regenerate the biomass after desorbing has happened by doing what's called desorbing. So you can desorb the metals from the biomass and then regenerate that biosorbent for another round of bioremediation. But moving on from biosorption to bioaccumulation, what are the differences between biosorption and accumulation, and is bioaccumulation better or worse to use as a bioremediation technique? Well, bioaccumulation refers to the active absorption of metals or contaminants into the cell rather than onto the cell, and it's an active process rather than a passive process. So what does this mean? It means that metals or contaminants, whatever you're remediating from that environment, whatever contaminant you are targeting, the bacteria or microbe is actively taking up that compound into its cell by an enzymatic transport system, which is often by accident. So typically they have transport systems for nutrients they need to take into their cell, and sometimes they accidentally take up something that is structurally analogous to the nutrient they're actually targeting, and they take up something toxic that benefits our purposes of using bioaccumulation, because that is what we're targeting. We're targeting these cells to take up this toxic metal that's in the environment, and so they accidentally take up this toxic metal or material into their cell through this transporter that's meant for something else that just looks similar. And once it's in their cell, they can't necessarily use it, so it kind of accumulates there. And that's why it's called bioaccumulation. And such bioaccumulation can work its way up the food chain to start accumulating these toxic metals in larger macro multicellular organisms just by them eating the smaller things that first ate or took up that toxic compound. So this accumulation pattern can not only happen in bacteria and microbial cells, but also in larger organisms as the accumulation works its way up the food chain and continues to accumulate. Somebody count how many times I said accumulate in the past 5 minutes. Anyway, I do want to point out that there are plenty of microbes that target and take up metals, even ones that are toxic to us, on purpose for their metabolic needs. However, this doesn't necessarily fall into bioaccumulation category. It falls under biotransformation. Instead of taking up the metal by accident into a transport system that wasn't meant for it and then accumulating within the cell, they actually take up the metal or whatever compound it is for their metabolic activity, and they take it in their cell and they transform it into something else by their metabolism and chemical transformation, and then they release whatever their byproduct is after they transform it. It's kind of like how we take up oxygen and sugars and we respire and convert it all into carbon dioxide, and that's what our byproduct is. Anyway, the cons of using bioaccumulation to bioremediate environments is that living microbial populations must be kept alive, obviously, and this requires keeping the environment at a specific pH, a specific temperature, having sufficient nutrient supply, and more, just to keep those microbes alive. And they also have to be kept uncontaminated by other species and microbial communities, which could be really hard when you're trying to remediate something in the natural environment. Those controlled conditions are much easier to meet in isolated environments that you create in the lab. So actually employing this method for remediating environments would be really difficult just to keep those parameters met. The other con listed here is that intracellular metals are really hard to recover. So what does this mean? Basically, we know that bioaccumulation takes the metal into its cell rather than just adsorbing it onto the surface of its cell. Because of this, it's really hard to get that metal out when it's time to try and reuse those bioaccumulators for another round of remediation. Instead, they have to be destroyed and they cannot be reused like biosorbent bacteria can be for remediation purposes. Instead of just being able to desorb the metal, you have to literally destroy the cell in order to recover the metal in the case of bioaccumulation. The last thing I want to discuss regarding bioremediation before we move to biorecovery is that microbes are not the only living things that can biosorb or accumulate metals and be employed to bioremediate environments. Instead, there are also macroorganisms like plants, for example, that can also be used. Metal uptake by plants is studied for two main reasons, not just remediation, but also to understand the possibility of crop contamination and subsequent toxicity of crops due to uptake of contaminants from the groundwater. However, in the case of bioremediation using plants is called phytoremediation. So last, I want to talk about biorecovery. First, why is the recovery of metals important? We just talked about how they're contaminants. We want to take them out of the environment and we don't want to see them. They're icky, no fun. Nobody likes metals. Well, that's not the case for all metals. Some metals can be pretty valuable to us. For example, what are you watching this video on? I bet it's made of metal. What we don't grow, we have to mine. And in some cases, economically valuable metals are in solutions and cannot cannot be traditionally mined. And in many instances, they are present at such low concentrations that we have to employ biology in order to recover the economically valuable metals or materials that are in those solutions. Recovering metals using biology from solutions where their concentrations are too low to do abiotically is called biorecovery. The actual processes associated with biorecovery are pretty much the same as those used for bioremediation. However, again, it's more favorable to use biosorbing than it is to use bioaccumulating because you want to easily obtain those metals after you recover them, and you also want to be able to reuse the biomass if possible. So after you use biosorbing to recover your metals, desorption can be achieved by using specific eluents or desorbing agents and or adjusting the pH or employing organic ligands that bind the specific metal that you are after. So again, bioaccumulation and assimilation are not super favorable, but can also be used in the case of bioremediation and recovery, whereas biosorption is the favorable method of bioremediation and recovery because you can easily desorb the metal contaminants or precious metals that you want after you absorb them onto your biomass, and therefore you can reuse the biomass after desorption. And biotransformation, as well as bioleaching, precipitation, biosynthesis, biodegradation, and again biosorption and bioaccumulation and assimilation will all be talked about in the upcoming biomineralization videos. So I hope to see you guys all there when we go over the difference between induced and controlled biomineralization in the part 1 biomineralization video, and then the examples of induced biomineralization of iron hydroxide, magnetite, manganese oxides, clays, and amorphous silica in the part 2 biomineralization video, and then more examples will be to come in the part 3, 4, and 5 of these biomineralization videos. I know that seems like a lot, but I swear I was going through it and I was like, this is way too much to put into one video. So you guys are going to get a 5-part biomineralization mini-series, I guess, for the GEO Bio videos coming up. And I hope you guys come back for those, and I see you there. And lastly, the reference I'm using again is GEO Microbiology for this video by Kurt Konhauser. As always, I love this book, super informative, and hats off to Kurt Konhauser for writing a 5-part biomineralization chapter. Or at least in my brain, it's 5-part. He does it all in one chapter. I don't know how. Anyhow, that's it for this video, and any other of my minor references and image sources are always also in my description, as well as that book is linked in my description. So go check that out if you're interested. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye. For certain, I was gonna say specific and then I said certain instead. Okay, it's been a long day.